Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a while, but no, I'm not dead. I just, needed to take a long break for health reasons, shall we say. And I know we're already in February, even mid-February, but I need to ease back into this. And we'll be taking things slow with this channel for the foreseeable future in any case. So what better way to do that than by falling back on a good old tradition? Yes, that of the yearly reading wrap-up. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. I'll go over last year's best non-fiction reads, last year's noteworthy worst and best fiction reads, and then conclude with a broad overview of this year's TBR and a couple other things. I'm going to try and keep my comments for each book as brief and to the point as possible, and will thus not go into detailed synopses or anything like that mostly. If you want to know more, well, you'll have to look it up yourselves. Thanks for understanding. Starting with the best, or at the very least most interesting, of 2024's non-fiction reads, I'll first mention two collections of essays that were originally written by Ursula K. Le Guin. These being Space Crone, a more recent collection centered on her more obviously feminist essays, and Dreams Must Explain Themselves, a slightly older collection curated by Le Guin herself, that also features essays on genre literature, the processes of artistic creativity, the rhythmic qualities of prose, the specific struggles faced by female artists as well, etc. I didn't always agree with Le Guin's analysis, or takes, shall we say, but I still thoroughly enjoyed both of these collections overall, and I'm certainly glad I have copies of them in my personal library. Then there's Neuropsychedelia, written by Nicolas Langlitz. This is an ethnographic study of the research more or less currently being done with psychedelic substances in the West. I found absolutely fascinating. It's one of those multidisciplinary works I tend to love that looks into the very ways we carry out scientific research and accrue knowledge, and what that then says about our dominant cultural and value paradigms. It pulled from various fields, including history, anthropology, sociology, critical theory, and philosophy, and yeah, it just kept my brain churning throughout. It's honestly a really great complement to my more STEM-oriented books about psychedelic medicine, and so I'd highly recommend it on those grounds. Then there's Time to Think, written by Hannah Barnes. This is a piece of investigative journalism that looks into the Gender Identity Development Service at the Tavistock Clinic, now closed, its history and, more recent scandal leading to it being closed, and more broadly, the current state of gender identity medicine for minors. In the UK specifically, of course, but you can extrapolate from this case to other countries in Europe and North America. I found the author's investigation thorough, very interesting, if a little alarming, and empathetic, and I think it has a fair bit to say about the dangers posed by the ideological capture of medicine and the tragic underfunding of public healthcare services. I also read Woman's Law by Sarah Clegg. This book traces the history and transforming meaning of various related female monsters from Near Eastern and European folklore and mythology, such as the mermaid or the lamia, starting in ancient Mesopotamia. And I found it to be a highly enjoyable and interesting piece of female-centric semiotics, shall we say, folklore and cultural scholarship. Its penultimate chapter was disappointingly weak, but overall this was a solid addition to my non-fiction library, and as someone who aligns with feminism and is a mythology nerd. Best non-fiction I read last year, by far, however, was undoubtedly The Creation of Patriarchy, written by Gerda Lerner. Like it says on the tin, this book lays out a plausible, evidence-based hypothesis and timeline for the emergence, the creation of patriarchal social systems, tied to the emergence of state systems and private property in Europe and the Middle East at least, though the author's basic reason can be more or less applied to other parts of the world whenever applicable, since these things didn't all happen at once the same exact way everywhere. The question of the emergence of patriarchy is one I personally find endlessly fascinating, and this book was the best kind of brain food for me. I found the scholarship rigorous and engaging, well written too, if, yeah, a teensy bit dated at times, but only a teensy bit, and so I would most definitely highly recommend it. Then I also mentioned 2 art books I really enjoyed. I do technically put that in the nonfiction. The first is The Field Guide to Witches, a book that brings together various illustrations and tidbits of writing about lots of different witches and witch-like creatures. Sometimes I think the meaning of the word witch is stretched a wee bit in this book, but it's not a big deal. From folklore, literature, and mythology, such as, well, the Baba Yaga, the goddess Isis, yes, the goddess is in this thing as well, Morgan Le Fay, the Bruxa, Black Anis, etc. It was pure witchy goodness, and the art was, overall, a delight to peruse across various styles and approaches. So this is a book that brings lots of different artists together, to be clear. So, yeah, definitely one to look out for if you love anything witchcraft and mythology related. And finally, I do need to squee once more about the glory. Yes, the glory. That is Soul Arts, a, let's be clear, deluxe art book. With every cent I paid for it, mind you, I also got it on sale, so there is that. Dedicated to the dark wonders of the Soulsborne video game series. This labor of love was put together by Michael Samuels, aka Vatividya, and features so much gorgeous art from lots of insanely talented artists. I felt inspired and creatively rejuvenated by this one. Yeah, it was that good. Undoubtedly, really, one of the most beautiful books, art books more specifically, I own, that I would highly recommend to any Soulsborne fan who can afford it, of course. Moving on to the fiction now, and starting with what I like to call the noteworthy fiction. It wasn't the worst, it wasn't the best, but there was something, I don't know, interesting or noteworthy about it. So, first I'm going to mention 2 of last year's meme reads. First, there's Pounded by the pound, turned gay by the socio-economic implications of Britain leaving the European Union. Yes, I went for the full title, I had to. Written by Chuck Tingle. And, well, if you know anything about Chuck Tingle, you'll know he wrote a shit ton of very short, that one was like 15 pages long, incredibly wacky, smutty stories with crazy title, though yes, I'm aware he has since published more serious works of SFF horror, specifically. I think I might check one out in the future, who knows. But so this one was one of the smutty crazy stories, and it was genuinely fun and funny to read. It was, to be very clear, absolutely smut as well, of a very bizarre kind, and not my kind of smut. A lot of it is gay male smut, so I'm not the target audience for that. But that's fine, because I laughed my head off, genuinely, reading this thing. And bonus, it was the perfect palate cleanser I needed when I read it, so just that made it worth it. And then second, there's Fourth Wing. First book in the Empyrean series, written by, you know this already, right? Rebecca Yarros. Yeah. I read it. And actually, it wasn't as bad as I expected, actually. It was serviceably mediocre, romantic-y cringe. Oh yes, plenty of cringe. But it did have dragons. Has dragons and griffins. Some action that wasn't complete garbage. For my part, I would say acceptable sex scenes. I don't know, I've read worse. I know some people find them insufferable. I've read worse. And thankfully it read or listened to very quickly. Don't get it twisted though. The romance itself was cringe, insufferable, and the world building was laughable. It is garbage. But the worst thing was undoubtedly Violet. I didn't think this was possible. I'd heard of this phenomenon, secondhand embarrassment. Violet gave me painful levels of secondhand embarrassment. Wow. So yeah, it could have been a lot worse, but it's definitely not my thing. I'm not the target audience. And I will absolutely not, continue with the series unless you pay me good, and I mean good money to do so. But since this is just the hobby booktube channel, it's not happening. Now I'll go over some classics I read last year. First, there's The Bell Jar, written by Sylvia Plath, which was one of last year's rereads as well. And I didn't enjoy it as much as I did the first time, unfortunately. The prose was sharp, in a good way, very elegant, but I didn't really connect with the story's protagonists, Esther, I think is her name, and narrator, nor particularly her experience of depression that much. I still think this book contains a valuable portrayal of the malady that is depression overall, but I don't know, I've read much more relatable experiences of depression since then. At the time, it was probably one of the only ones. I was like, oh yeah, okay, I see myself here, but since then, I've read better and more relatable portrayals of depression. And then I didn't find the supposed feminist quality of the text particularly salient this time around either. It was still good, yes. It's a good read, but I probably won't reread this one again in the future. But, I'm happy I revisited it at least. I also reread Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. I got it right this time. And there again, didn't enjoy it nearly as much as I did the first time I read it. In all fairness, though, with this one, I first read it almost 20 years ago, a long time ago, when I was a much younger and less experienced reader, and so less settled in my tastes. I still liked it, mind you, I still think it's good. It had luscious prose I half enjoyed, in places I thought it was a bit much, so half enjoyed, half found it excessive. It had decent commentary on aesthetics, is what I would call it, hedonism and vice, but then I was honestly left disappointed by the character work, which is much more important for me in a work of general fiction, although I guess it's a bit gothic-y in places, but still more or less general fiction. So yeah, disappointed by the character work, especially when it came to Dorian Gray himself. And then wasn't a big fan of the book's pacing, and then the inevitable Victorianness of the aforementioned commentary. But I mean, it comes with the territory ultimately. Still worth rereading as an adult, absolutely, but here again, I doubt I'll ever revisit this one. Then there's Fyodor Dostoyevsky's Crime and Punishment, which I read for the first time last year. It was fine, but underwhelming. You know the drill by now. I'm just very difficult with classics in general, and this one just didn't really do it for me. What the story had to say about criminality, psychology even, kind of, wasn't worthless, no. In fact, it felt surprisingly good for a book written in the 19th century, but I didn't find the book's theming that revolutionary either. It wasn't that good. I didn't care for its religious commentary in the slightest, and I found its main character, Raskolnikov, immeasurably tiresome. In no small part because I'm very, very done with being asked to feel sympathy for tortured and assholish men. The ending was also, honestly, for me, hot garbage because true story, proto-insta-love. And finally, I also read, for the first time, Rebecca, written by Daphne du Maurier. This psychological drama to psychological thriller, your mileage will vary there, was pretty good. Yeah. It had very atmospheric and evocative writing, decent bits of character introspection, and yeah, more or less an effective mystery plot. I didn't really care about the characters. I wasn't a big fan of the book's ending either, even though it made a certain kind of narrative sense, and I didn't get much beyond those bits of character insight in terms of greater theming. Still, I don't think I wasted my time reading this one at least once, so that's okay. Some noteworthy standalones and short story collections that aren't, classics. Since I got to vote in last year's Hugo Awards, I read a few of the nominees. The two that stood out to me were Rose House, a novella written by Arkady Martine, and Witch King, a novel written by Martha Wells. The former was honestly a really good near-future sci-fi thriller and sort of haunted house story, where the house is haunted by an AI. It didn't have the deepest theming or developed world building in the world, but for an about equally ideas and entertainment-driven story, it really worked for me. The latter, for its part, was also surprisingly enjoyable. It had a decently engaging plot, satisfyingly evocative prose, and, more importantly for me, compelling elements of world building that definitely make me want to check out some of Martha Wells' other works of fancy. Not, to repeat myself, the Murderbot Diaries, though I'm just not interested in that at all. Also read 2 books by writers I'd wanted to check out for a while. Spinning Silver, written by Naomi Novik, it was also a gift, and Among Others, written by Joe Walton. I'd say I liked both about equally. I enjoyed the former's atmospheric writing, its world building rooted in Slavic folklore and mythology, and its gynocentrism. There was some theming, but it wasn't anything too significant in my book. I'm also not sure the story needed all its points of view. Still, a satisfying read overall. As to the latter book, I enjoyed its genuinely loving ode to books, reading, speculative fiction more specifically, and a literary fandom, its real-world rural Welsh and English settings, and its, cozy vibes. It lacked greater depth and resolution for my taste, and I wished I could have related a bit more to its non-normie, shall we say, protagonist, but it too was still a pleasant read overall. I'd definitely read something else by both of these authors in the future. Then there's Gibbon's Decline and Fall. Yes, just like the work of historical non-fiction, there's a reason for that anyway. Written by Sheri S. Tepper. The Gate to Women's Country is a favourite of mine, and I also thoroughly enjoyed Grass and Raising the Stones, so I wanted to read something else by Tepper, and landed on this one. And it was weird. Mostly the bad kind of weird. Again, for me, subjectively. It's vaguely dystopian sci-fi. It has ecological collapse, a rise of the religious right, and a loss of sex drive plague. That was actually a very neat concept, and it does engage in feminist theming, sort of, some of which I liked, some of which irked me somewhat, but okay, at least I was thinking. But then it just went off the rails hard in terms of just sheer, what the fuck is happening right now? Why are you doing this? And so, yeah, let's just say that the lizard on that cover, it's there for a reason. Not one I would have expected in a million years. But I don't want to spoil the surprise, I guess. But yeah, I was left disappointed. Still, it wasn't a complete waste of time, and I do have to give a point to Tepper for the fact I really did not see that twist coming involving lizards. Wow. I also read Marlon James's Moon Witch Spider King, which I know isn't technically a standalone, but I read it as such, given I haven't read Black Leopard Red Wolf, and don't plan to. I went into this one mostly blind, and it was pretty good, actually. It read as pretty competently executed, rather dark secondary world and high fantasy, with a richly realized world rooted in African languages, cultures, and religious practices. I found refreshingly engaging. That was, really good. That really kept me going with this book. I found its protagonist, Sogolon, interesting enough to follow, though there were issues with the pacing of her character development and motivations, and honestly with the pacing of the story as a whole. To my great surprise, however, it also actually displayed a pretty good amount of understanding and compassion, so compassionate understanding, for female experiences under patriarchy, or patriarchal social structures. It was surprising in no small part because the writer is a man, which, men can write with an understanding of these topics, but I was pleasantly surprised, that's all I can say. I really did not take to the book's pidgin English, though. Try as I might. I really try to stay open. And it's not that I'm not open-minded with this, but for me, it made the reading experience way clunkier than it should have been. I was just not a fan, personally, but for those who enjoy that, more power to you. But otherwise, yeah, it was a solidly good read, though probably not good enough to make me want to read the third book in the trilogy. Then I'd like to mention 2 collections of short stories. The first is Women as Demons, written by Tanith Lee. I'd wanted to read something by that writer for a while, so I decided to go with this collection, and I really liked it. Genre-wise, it's mostly horror, both fantasy and sci-fi horror. There's a decent sprinkling of, again, and your mileage will vary with this, more or less feminist theming in this collection as well, which is why I wanted to read Tanith Lee in the first place. And I really enjoyed the prose in these stories. Something about it reminded me of Edgar Allan Poe, or even H.P. Lovecraft, at times, somewhat. It's not a huge sameness, but there's something there. So definitely one to consider if you're in the mood for something a little spookier by a feminist SFF writer. And then second, there's The Book of Witches, edited, I think that's the right word, by Jonathan Strahan. Though I guess it's more a thematic anthology than a short story collection, stricto sensu, since the book also features pieces of poetry. All by various authors, writing across several different speculative subgenres. So there's horror, fantasy, sci-fi, sci-fantasy, etc. Just like the Book of Dragons, right? It's the exact same concept, but with witches instead of dragons as the anthology's guiding motif. Now, if I had to choose, I'd say I preferred the Book of Dragons over this one. That being said, the Book of Witches was still a very enjoyable read overall. I'd furthermore happily recommend to witch and witchcraft enthusiasts. Moving on to a few series now, I kinda have to mention Mal's Book of the Fallen again, written by Stephen Erickson, of course, or rather Gardens of the Moon, and about a fifth, I think it was, of Deadhouse Gates. If only because I started to learn how to DNF with this series. I recorded a reading vlog that details my failed attempt to get into Malzen, if you want to check that out. So suffice it to say, this series just wasn't meant for me. I liked the bits of world building I got, yes. I found them decently tantalizing, but several somethings about the plotting, the pacing, the narrative scope, the lack of immediately engaging theming, and the sheer RPG-ness of it all just didn't mesh with my brain, and that's okay. At least I tried. Then there's a series I finished, but found insanely mediocre. I still stand by that 3 billion%. That's the First Law trilogy written by Joe Abercrombie. I still do not understand the hype for this one. I really don't, and probably never will. I recorded a conversational review, that's what I'm gonna call it, of the trilogy with my lovely friend Paramita, if you'd like to check that out. So all I'll repeat here is that the world building was garbage, but then I kind of expected that. Close to non-existent, really. The character work wasn't that good. It was good, but it wasn't that good. The plot was serviceable, but it relied much too heavily on subversion for subversion's sake, and all to prop up a meager thread of rather uninspired nihilistic theming. Fight me. There was some humor, yes, I did laugh a couple of times, but it wasn't that funny either. Like I said last year, this wasn't bad. I'll be very clear about that. I didn't think it was bad. I wasn't offended or anything like that, but at the end of the day, this was nothing more than a thing, and I read it. It was a thing and I read it, and that's that. Finally, a series I reread last year, Harry Potter, written by J.K. Rowling. I recorded a series review for this one, if you're interested, so all I'll repeat here is that it was, on the whole, a very enjoyable reread. The first two books were a little rough going for me, and the series as a whole can't really measure up to the kind of ideas-driven SFF I truly love as an adult reader in terms of theming, world-building, or even, deeper character work, but I still found the whimsy inherent in the Wizarding world charming. It really is charming. I still found its fantastical beasts delightful because critter and mythology nerd. I gained a new appreciation for its adult characters. Hagrid became my bestest boy. #immeasurably based. I still loved Luna Lovegood, though there wasn't nearly enough of her for my taste, and it was nice, or at least interesting, to see Rowling's writing and story crafting improve with each volume. More or less. I still prefer the later books to the earlier ones, and I still thoroughly dislike the series' entirely unnecessary and, let's be honest, come on, schmaltzy as fuck epilogue. Just, we didn't need that. I did, however, really appreciate the thematic importance that was given to love and, friendship and loyalty as an adult reader. That was actually lovely. No, I didn't enjoy Harry Potter as much as I did as a child and tween, and that's what I expected. And I probably won't bother rereading it in the future. I might rewatch the movies, though. I don't know if there's a Hogwarts Legacy too, I might play that. But, yeah, I'm glad I took the time to revisit this series at least once, and read it as an adult at least once. Moving on to the worst of 2024, and I'm going to go into a wee bit more detail in places, I guess, since I have skipped a lot of monthly reading wrap-ups. Thankfully, there weren't actually too many of those. I mostly got burnt out by a lot of mediocre reads, and, well, bad mental health, rather than outright bad ones. Still, here they are. So, first, there's This Is How You Lose the Time War, co-written by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. I got this on a whim at WorldCon. WorldCon was amazing. And it was a fat, or I guess in this case, slim, thank Christ, waste of money and time. It's supposed to be a lesbian sci-fi epistolary romance between two far-future humanoid spies who travel back in time through many parallel strands of time to manipulate history, or history's plural, and thus ensure their faction ultimately wins in the future. If I got that right, because it gets very freaking confusing. The prose went from elegant in places, yes, I will give it that, to teenage puppy love levels of cringe. The character work was basically irrelevant. There was no real believable build-up to the romance, so it basically committed the sin of insta-love, given the over-the-top level it eventually reached. And worst of all in my book, this is the kind of story that treats creative speculation as mere aesthetics. The world building in this bitch is so flimsy and, yeah, confusing, incomprehensible in places, that it adds nothing interesting to the story, much less romance. This stupid thing could have been, and I would argue should have been, set in the real world. I mean, you could have made it historical fiction, I guess, given how utterly wasted its science fictional quality was. Even worse than that, though, yes, it does get worse, it felt like the story decided to give me the middle finger when it doubled down on some of the worst pitfalls of time travel as a narrative device, because I guess it remembered that it had to be science fiction, and it rendered its already paltry romance completely and utterly meaningless. What a fucking waste of a book. Then there's the Mimimede. I guess that's how you pronounce it. Solution. The Mimimede Solution, written by Catherine Kempf. Now, I DNF this one. Self-pat. I wouldn't normally give a rating to a book I DNF, nor bother including it in a worst off section. But given I read a little over half of this book I DNF'd at 52%, I decided to give myself permission to go ahead and vent a little about this one. Because the Mimimede Solution was borderline offensive to me. Yeah, I don't use that word lightly. The basic premise is that the world's been wrecked by climate change, rising sea levels, and a volcanic winter of some sort, if I got that right. And the Irish decided to conquer the UK. Honestly, that reads like an EU4 campaign, sue me. Pan-Celticize everyone, then go raiding reverse Viking style along the shores of Scandinavia, but not the north of continental Europe, apparently. Our main characters are Scandinavians, I guess, and find refuge in an undersea techno bunker where everyone follows a neo-pagan Norse religion. I'll admit this all sounded vaguely interesting to me at first, but the fact is the world building made absolutely no fucking sense whatsoever. But I could have lived with that. What's infinitely worse, though, is that the way the Scandinavian, I'm using air quotes for a reason here, and Celtic characters were described in a way that betrayed a painful, borderline offensive ignorance of actual Scandinavian and, broadly speaking, Celtic cultures, languages, and histories. Histories which are still relevant today because Scandinavia is still a real place today. Scandinavians are real people. Irish people are real people. Welsh people are still real people. Breton peoples are real people. You know what I mean. It is very clear to me the author didn't do her research to the point where a lot of this stuff read as grossly stereotypical at best, if not a little offensive at worst. Especially when it came to the so-called Celts and the Irish who supposedly started it all. Now, just a teensy bit of context. You have to understand, outside of my own disgust, I took this a little personally because my partner is an Irishman. And I love him to bits. He's a very big history nerd and knows a lot about the history of his own country, and I've learned a lot about said history, thanks to him, including, the episode of the Troubles. And there's still ramifications of the Troubles today. Like this is not ancient history. So I'm sorry, but cultural sensitivity, cultural appropriation, we talk about a lot of these things today, and I might go into a more detailed vent again, maybe in the future. But it's not okay to do this with non-Western cultures, but it's not okay to do this with Irish culture, with Scandinavian culture. You can't just treat this shit as exotic set dressing for your fiction. It is disrespectful, so fuck off. And finally, calm down a bit, there's, of course, Infinite Jest, written by David Foster Wallace. I'd almost forgotten I'd read that last year. I recorded a reading vlog and accompanying review of this thing, if you want to check that out. So, suffice it to say this, in my book, barely counts as a novel, almost broke my brain, and nearly sent me into reading burnout at the start of 2024. I understand now extra hard why people make fun of postmodernism, or in this case, postmodernism, or whatever the fuck you want to classify Infinite Jest as. This was the epitome of largely meaningless excess for the sake of excess and try-hardy too many thingsness. It wasn't entirely worthless insofar as it featured decently thoughtful and at times moving, yes, I will give it that, commentary on the tragedy of addiction and personal hell of severe depression, but all of that was certainly lost in the sauce of this book's sheer plotless chaos. Not the worst thing I've ever read, no, but undoubtedly the worst thing I read last year. Never again. Famous last words, I know, but never again. Moving on to more positive pastures now with the best of what I read in 2024. Though I'm kind of sad to say, nothing really became a new all-time favorite. Hashtag Big Sag. Still. First, there's Milkman, written by Anna Burns, which is also the very last book I read last year. This book follows a young woman who is stalked and harassed by a shadowy male figure called Milkman during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, so it's general and historical fiction. It had really lovely, thoughtful prose that seamlessly included local accent and dialect, pretty compelling character work, and yes, most importantly for me, really good, layered, nuanced, and moving, theming on the intersection of sex-based oppression and broader ethno-cultural and religious affiliations in the midst of the Civil War, the Troubles, and on personal, communal, and intergenerational fear and trauma. It's quite a lot, but it's very well done. So yeah, this is one I would definitely recommend. I even recommended it to my partner. Then there's The Color Purple, written by Alice Walker, which was also my third reread of 2024. And, as it turned out, my best reread of 2024 as well. I loved The Color Purple as much, if not a little more, than I did the first time I read it, and it also firmly remains an all-time general fiction favourite. The epistolary format and usage of what I'll call imperfect English were masterfully used to convey the story's very strong emotional notes, and then deep, nuanced theming on oppression, trauma, resilience, female community, faith, and love, and I would also qualify it as a work of feminist fiction, at least partly. I recorded a review for this one as well, if you're interested, and yeah, just like I did the first time I read it, I shed rivers of tears when I finished The Color Purple for the second time. It's an absolutely beautiful novel. And finally, there's the Mieville stuff. I wouldn't say China Mieville's back catalogue saved my reading year exactly, but it certainly helped raise its average rating, that's for sure. Because Mieville's work really has reached all reliable status for me, just like Le Guin's and perhaps a teensy bit more than Vandermeer's at this point, but this might change in the future, I don't know. I read 6 books written by China Mieville last year, but the 3 that stood out the most were Railsea and King Rat, 2 novels, and The Last Days of New Paris, a novella. I loved all of them about equally, though the latter 2 were probably the most deliciously ideas-driven and rich in theming overall. But, I mean, Railsea was insanely fun too, and brilliantly imaginative with its literal sea of rails, its retelling of Moby Dick, and playful little nod to Roadside Picnic. King Rat, for its part, was a very clever and engaging Pied Piper retelling, and I'd never seen that before. And The Last Days of New Paris taught me a lot about surrealist art in the most wonderfully weird way possible. That one was so neat. Honestly, easily one of the best novellas I've ever read in my life. If you have an interest in art history, I'd recommend it for that alone, kind of. So, yeah, I'm very excited to read more of Mieville's work this coming year, that's for friggin' sure. Before I move on to my 2025 TBR, I'll just cover a couple more things that marked my 2024 reading and media consuming year. First, I went to Worldcon. Yeah, I went to the 2024 Worldcon in Glasgow in August with my partner, and it was honestly easily one of the best experiences in my life. It was so much fun. So good. I would definitely like to do something like that again in the future, and if Worldcon does go to Dublin in 2029, then I'm going to make sure I'm able to attend that one as well. I'll also mention the best TV shows I watched last year, or at least, you know, the SFF stuff. There's Dungeon Meshi. I absolutely love that anime. The fact it has neurodivergent coded characters certainly helps, and I'm very excited for season 2. There's Star Trek Lower Decks, which, yeah, I only watched because my partner's a Trekkie. I think he'd agree with that. But I ended up thoroughly enjoying it as well, in no small part due to the glory of Moopsie. Moopsie. If you know, you know. And yes, you can honestly enjoy it without knowing much about Star Trek, because I'm not a Trekkie at all. I mean, I've watched bits of it now because of my partner, but like, I'm not really that in the know, just bits. There's Castlevania, which I watched with my partner in November, and then I can add Has-Been Hotel, and especially Hell of a Boss 2. Oh wait, actually no, there's also freaking Smiling Friends. A short animated series that feels, I mean, that's how I describe it, an acid trip, but in the best way possible. Yeah. And then also Over the Garden Wall, a lovely little gem of fantastical animation you should absolutely check out if you can. around Halloween if possible. I did also watch most of season 2 of Rings of Power with my partner because he lovingly pressured me into it, and I stand by the fact that Rings of Power as a show needs to be thrown in a pit of hellfire, then doused with acid for good measure. I watched Star Trek Discovery, well I guess, yeah no I have been watching more Star Trek anyway, with my partner again, and that was very bad. We both agree on this. Bad. We also started watching Dune Prophecy together, and I can't. So it's not Rings of Power bad, but you know, it's just another one of those SFF shows that desperately tries to be the next Game of Thrones, even if the material doesn't actually fit. And I'm not about that. I'm sick of it, honestly. It also leaned really badly into some of, to my mind, the worst aspects of Dune's world building. And I love Dune's world building. I praise it, especially the first trilogy, but there are issues with it too, especially the science stuff, the genetic stuff. So, like, nope. I mean, we watched, what, 2 episodes? 3? You might have watched a bit more. I'm like, just nah. I'm not wasting my time with that. I almost forgot, but I did watch the first season of Last of Us. Shroom Zombies for the win. It was good. To very good. I really enjoyed it. I will probably watch season 2. That's that. And then I, of course, also watched season 2 of House of the Dragon. And I'd say I thoroughly enjoyed it mostly, but I don't know, the more I think about it, I'm just kind of really worried it's also going to go down the pits. Given some of the choices that were made with some of its characters for reasons I don't think are super genuine, let's put it that way. And then there's also the stuff Mr. Martin said himself on his blog. So wait and see, I guess. And then yes, I watched Dune Part 2 and was largely disappointed with it. It was still good. It was a good movie. It's not a garbage adaptation. No. But I wanted it to be great. It deserved to be great, and I don't think it was. Too much was lost, for my taste, in terms of theming and deeper world building in, service of spectacle. That was meh. I will still watch Part 3 whenever it comes out, yes, but I will go in with adequately lowered expectations. So what about this year? Well, the one big change I've decided to make to my TBR and reading calendar is to leave a big chunk of it undetermined. I'm a bit of a planning freak, but I'd like to give myself the space to engage in buddy reads, mood reading, or, just to be able to walk into a bookstore and pick something up on a whim without feeling like I'll have to put it off until the following year because my TBR is already full up and I'm going to stress about timing and scheduling and all that stuff. So this year I have a lot of open reading slots that will allow me to do just that. I will also endeavour to keep getting good at DNFing, though hopefully that won't be necessary too often. And then I'm going to read a bit less overall, because there are other things I want to do more often, because actually having somewhat of a social life means I simply don't have as much time to read, and because, recovering from a very severe bout of depression and burnout means I need to take it easy. And sometimes that means doing something other than reading. Yes, even when you're a bookworm. As to some of what I've already committed to reading, so I plan on reading all of the remaining physical books I purchased, or was gifted, when I attended WorldCon. These include Who Fears Death, written by Nnedi Okorafor, Fathom Folk, I'm actually reading it right now, it's surprisingly enjoyable, written by Eliza Chan, and Dragonfall by L.R. Lamb. I will also read 2 SF masterworks I received as Christmas gifts from my parents, Life by Gwyneth Jones and Stand on Zanzibar, written by John Brunner. I've also planned a couple of rereads, Jeff Vandermeer's Born, which I actually already reread and loved, more on that at a later point maybe, and Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower. I might also reread Parable of the Talents, but that's less certain because honestly, the world is already dystopian enough as it is at the minute, and I'm not sure I really want too much of that in my fiction right now. Then there are a few titles I'd like to check out by writers I've enjoyed before, or even favourite writers. There's Bright Sword, written by Lev Grossman, The Book of Elsewhere, written by China Mieville, and yes, Keanu Reeves, not that I really care about the latter, no offense to him. The as of yet untitled novel Mieville is going to release this year, and Absolution, written by Jeff Vandermeer. You can probably tell I'm low-key dreading that one, because the Southern Reach trilogy is perfect. It's a perfect little gem as it is. Please don't ruin it. I love it to bits, please. But I have to read this belated bookful, right? Yeah, I have to, but oh, please. I won't let it, no, you know what? I won't let it ruin the perfect gem that is the Southern Reach original trilogy, but yeah. Anyway, moving on. Finally, I plan on at least starting a few series, but I might not read all of them all the way through, assuming they are completed this year. I'm gonna start. There's Talon Sister by Jen Williams. I'm really looking forward to that one. And if I like it, I might just actually read the second one because it's just a duology. There's The Cloud Roads by Martha Wells. I told you I wanted to read something else by Martha Wells. That's what I'm picking. Children of Gods and Fighting Men, written by Shauna Lawless, because I need me some of that Irish Celtic history and mythology-inspired fantasy, and on that related note, I also plan on reading Evangeline Walton's retelling of the Welsh Mabinogion, which I have read. I have a Penguin Classics edition of the Mabinogion. I guess it's, you know, it is fiction, but presented as non-fiction, kind of. It's mythology. But this is a fully fictionalized retelling, so yay. And that's it! I'm done. That concludes my, I know, very belated 2024 reading wrap-up, but I'm not going to do a reading wrap-up for all the months I missed, so this will have to be good enough. I hope you enjoyed this video, found it all the usual good things. I hope that you all had a good reading year yourselves, and that this coming reading year will be just as good, if not better. And on that very final note, I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Mental health in general is very important. And thank you for watching. I shall see you all at some point, because again, this channel is not dead, not yet, in another video. But until then, bye bye.